Jen, thank you so much for joining us today. As we start, can you say a few words about your current position and what's in your purview?
Absolutely. So I am the Chief Marketing Officer of Netography. We're a Series A cybersecurity startup. I've been with the company for about a year and 10 months now. Emerging market, trying to create our own market. It's a really interesting ride. What's most exciting about it, honestly, is the team I'm working with. A lot of really great innovators have come together for this company. And I'm fortunate that I've worked with some of them in the past as well. So it's been a really nice reunion too.
Awesome. And as far as Chief Marketing Officer, I assume everything from demand generation, field marketing, content,
Yep.
communications, everything kind of rolls up.
Everything, marketing and sales operations, some demand creation, et cetera. The upside of being a small startup is the breadth of responsibility is wider.
You wear a lot of hats.
Yes.
I would imagine.
Yes.
You mentioned emerging, not to kind of take it on a tangent, but you mentioned an emerging market. We sometimes talk about category creation. Is it something which is a very interesting topic in itself?
Yeah.
I wonder if is it something that you kind of is it part of the plan to create your own 2x2 that Gartner will place you in the right corner?
You got to read my mind. Yeah. So one of the reasons that I wanted to join is there is a category creation opportunity here. We have been working with Gartner, with Forrester, with ESG and others, and we've finally landed on something called a network defense platform direction that we're going with our market. It's been supported by Gartner, it's been supported by ESG, but those things take a while to build, but it's part of the fun to try to carve out space. It's not as fun in a down market. It's a little bit harder to get people's attention for something new, but it's a lot of fun to category create.
Certainly. I think it's personally for me, it's a fascinating topic, and it's very interesting. Obviously, what some of the household name companies managed to accomplish in that space, and I think it just as a concept, it's very well, one, compelling, two, challenging, and three, rewarding if you can pull it off. So it's I guess kudos to you. So it's kind of what you described kind of paints the picture of where you are, but I wanted to get a sense of the arc of the career arc. How did you get into cybersecurity marketing? What was the impetus?
So, to be perfectly honest, I stumbled into it when I was looking for a job back in 2000. So I started my career in journalism. I was working as an obituary writer and a copy editor for a newspaper.
Obituary writer.
Yes. Not very uplifting, not very happy work, I will say that. But I moved to the Bay Area. I live in New York City now, but I lived in San Francisco for about 20 years. Moved there in 2000 and I needed to find a gig, and I figured I could transition from journalism to PR, which I did. And I was hired by a small boutique PR agency that no longer exists, that specialized in CRM and security clients. And so I started doing PR for them, and then just kind of went from there. And I went in-house and really grew as an internal comms leader. And then about, I guess, 12 years or so ago, a company called SourceFire that was acquired by Cisco later, I went in as a VP of comms and corporate marketing. And that's where the broader marketing path really started to go. And then I've been a CMO ever since that acquisition.
Amazing. Well, I think if you have background in copywriting, it's in the end of the day, it's you're using words to persuade people. I think it translates so well to all things marketing. In the end of the day, right? It's
absolutely
demand generation. It's selling people on the problem and getting them excited or scared, I guess, or anxious about it.
We're trying not to scare people, but sometimes the topics are scary. Absolutely.
Right. Well, it's kind of comes, I guess, a little bit comes with territory. Obviously there is a little bit of a backlash in the industry. Well, if only you used our product, you would not have been breached. So why didn't I know we talk to CISOs, and sometimes this comes up as not something they appreciate, but I think everyone on the marketing side of things, they're kind of well aware of the tact and the tone. So it's but I guess going back in general, kind of persuasion and understanding persuasion kind of early on, I'm sure it was such a helpful lift from the career perspective.
Yeah, it absolutely did. And I think that's one of the reasons that helped me kind of jump the fence is, especially starting in PR. I was like, look, I was of the audience that you used to try to convince to get your attention to do coverage, because I was doing reporting as well. And so the art of the pen is very, there's a lot of different ways that you can apply that. So that did help a lot. And I would say even this is going to sound crazy, but even doing some of the obituary work helped me in a way, because it made me very conscientious of the power of words, because one wrong word used the wrong way and something that's so important to people, from a human perspective, you experience that human interaction. I think some of that applies to marketing as well.
Absolutely.
Especially in security, where it is very personal. CISOs are up at night. They don't want to get victim shamed if they get a breach. They don't want to do that. You've got to be really careful how you've got to have empathy in marketing and security, I think. And so I think those two things align.
Absolutely. Because I think, obituary, one, is very emotional and very personal. And two, you want to tell a story of the person who passed, right? So and people convey meaning through stories a lot of times. So I think it's very powerful, telling a story and telling it and connecting on an emotional level. I think it is very powerful. And speaking of CISOs, I think a lot of them, at least, again, it's my personal perspective, we find that oftentimes when a certain company is doing well, it's usually the CEO or the president or VP of sales or chief marketing officer gets the pat on the shoulder, like, congrats on this growth. And no one knows that the company is being attacked 10,000 times a day through pinging ports or using pen testing tools, trying to access data that shouldn't be accessed. So, and meanwhile, the CISO is fighting the bad guys in the dark, and no one is the wiser. It's only when things go sideways, it's then all eyes is on the CISO.
Right.
And it's I think it's a little bit unfair, and kind of connecting on that and just making sure that they're heard and appreciated. I think it would go a long way.
I agree.
It's a very interesting story. So from your vantage point, you've been CMO in a series of cybersecurity companies. For someone who's just getting started, maybe they're transitioning from journalism to comms or marketing, or maybe someone who's in technology marketing looking into cybersecurity as a space, or maybe even earlier, someone who's maybe more junior, maybe a student in a college, just looking at what they want to do with their life. What would be your advice? Time is everyone's most valuable resource, and there's so many things that one can be doing, from networking to courses to internships. What would you say some of the more junior professionals should focus on, the 2-3 things they can do earlier on to set them up for success down the line?
So this should go, I hope this doesn't sound obvious. I should say that, become a subject matter expert the best you can. One of the challenges in our industry, or maybe it's more in the security community, is that there's a lot of segregation that happens between folks that are in technical roles and those that are not in traditionally technical roles, like maybe a sales or a marketing or biz dev, or even some product roles. And I think that has a tendency, at least I know from talking to marketing mentees, to scare them away from the technology. And they think, well, I'm not technical, so I can't do that. But as a marketer in this industry, and any industry really, it's you need to understand what you're putting out there, and especially with the potential black holes that we see and the caution we need to use around FUD and all of that. You need to be able to take these really complex technology scenarios or attacks or attacker profiles, whatever your company is doing, and translate them into something that can resonate at a very human level, as well as can differentiate yourselves from the thousands of other vendors that are out there. So really not don't put up there are enough gates out there for us in marketing. Don't put up a gate for yourself. Dive in and study the technical docs and ask folks in your company for help. Most of them are willing to help you. So I would say that just because it is a big conversation I see a lot in security groups and social media. The other thing that I would say is, marketing these days, it wasn't so much when I started. So I started in comms. And when I started in comms, I didn't really have to understand the mechanics of marketing. PR and marketing were very different. And when you get for really large organizations, comms is a very different animal than in smaller orgs. So it's a whole different thing. Like, I'm just thinking of a friend of mine that leads a comms team for Visa. That's a whole entity in and of itself. When you're thinking about security, you really need to understand PR is no longer coverage for coverage sake. It really hasn't been for a long time. And look at what you're doing as anything that you're doing, regardless of your role. Look at what you're generating as a sales tool, whether it's a third-party validation article from press, whether it's something with industry analysts, and understand, really dig into the impact of it. Go beyond, I'm using comms as an example since that's how I started. Go beyond the share of voice or the share of mind or the coverage count or whatever you use. So hopefully people don't use coverage count. And if they do, they don't count press releases. But go beyond that and look at, like, okay, what types of, how many leads are coming into our site, or what leads are coming into the site because of the work that we're doing with this kind of thing. So I think it's really important for anyone in marketing, regardless of their role, to be operational. So that's two things, but they were two long things. So I'll pause there to see if you want me to
Well,
keep.
no, it makes a lot of sense. And kind of to double click on the last thing that you said, kind of keeping track of things. I know that a lot of marketers in general, kind of in cybersecurity in particular, they rely heavily on data, particularly in intent data. So there's so many different vendors out there, Bombora, G2 Crowd, Zoom Info, where you can see who's on your website, who is downloading certain white papers and doing research, and things like this. What we find is that at any given point in time, only a fraction of your total addressable market, 5%, maybe 10%, would exhibit intent. There'll be it would appear that they're actively in the market for a certain solution. The rest of them, they may be qualified. They're qualified by their title, by their industry or company size, but they're early in their customer journey. And how do you engage them? Because oftentimes we find that to walk them through that customer journey, there needs to be evangelism, education. You need to sell them on the problem, but often people find challenging to educate someone who doesn't really want to talk to you because they're busy with something else. Right. So naturally, a lot of this education is happening outside of, well, one, control, and two, visibility tools. In what the term that I heard is dark funnels. It's the private Slack channels. It's with a friend over coffee, or in personal email, or in personal conversation, that you don't control, you don't track it, you don't know it's happening. All you know is someone searching for your company name and filling out the form, contact me. How do you think about marketing role into more actively managing this process of engaging with people who are earlier in the customer journey, who are kind of overwhelmed and busy?
So I have a few different thoughts in that question that are important. So first, you mentioned intent. I wish I could remember the source, but I read a really interesting report recently about how by the time someone shows up as having intent based on whatever intent profile and buyer committee you set up and whichever ABM tool you use, they're probably close to a decision. If you're about to start engaging them, then you're probably too late. Right? If they get to that point of showing up, that doesn't mean intent's not valuable, but I think a pitfall that marketers and a lot of salespeople fall into is they wait to see intent to take an action versus doing a really more strategic ABX approach where they're looking at accounts that they want to go after, and not waiting for signal that there may be interest. And so what it's going to sound like I'm tooting the comms horn because I started in comms, but one thing I talk about a lot is where, people don't open emails anymore. You don't use many forms anymore because everybody's anti-form. We have one on our website to contact us, but everything else is instant scheduling or it's ungated, and there's some ads and what have you. It's really important, I think, to just be as present as possible through where that your buyers already exist. And I love that term, dark funnel. I haven't heard that before, but I will use it. But where do you know that those buyers go? What communities do they exist in that maybe you can get into through like word of mouth, or folks in your company that could have conversations with folks that might be part of that process? What industry publications are they reading? And it's not even the traditional news sites anymore. But those types of things. Some of them, especially the larger Fortune 100 organizations, are still very beholden on Gartner recommendations in order to get something signed off by their CFO, right? A lot of times it's the finance teams that require that more than the buyer themselves. So I think a lot of it, I call it outside in. I don't know, it's not even really a channel. I kind of made it up myself, and it's not groundbreaking. Lots of other people do it. They just may not call it that. But really figuring out where are buyers, potential buyers, what is the persona of that buyer at our ICP? Where are they spending time? And where can we get information disseminated to them so they come to us? And then we start seeing signal that's not necessarily intent, but you really look at engagement. And the old ways of lead scoring, we still do it, but it's not as helpful as it used to be. It's really more, we've pivoted to engagement scoring. And it's not a, hey, sales, this person got an engagement level of blah. You must go. They must be ready to buy, because I don't think it's possible to really know that anymore with the way the buyer activity has changed. But at least you get a good understanding of, okay, this person has come to our site. They've spent at least X amount of minutes on this many pages. They've spent a lot more time on our compromise detection solution more than our government solution. Maybe I'll do cold outreach. I'm not going to be creepy and say, I saw someone from your org on our website, or that person, if they're already saying you're HubSpot or Marketo or whatever you use, if you know who they are on their website, and then try to engage with them. Again, it goes back to that emotional factor. Where might they be feeling pain, right? I think that's the best approach that we can use right now. And that's honestly what's worked best for us. Trying as a smaller company, trying to get that at scale is hard. But I think that's really the answer to that. So it's a combination of some intent, but don't wait for the intent. Look for engagement, but you have to manifest that engagement by getting that content. A content-driven engine will never steer you wrong in that regard.
Well, as you said, outside in, and ungated content, and being helpful, playing the long game, not looking for something transactional and quick. And
exactly. And we were talking before about category creation. We had an analyst report that came out recently, for example, and somebody asked me if we were going to gate it. And I was like, absolutely not. I want as many eyes on that thing as possible. And if someone's compelled enough, they know how to find us, they'll come to us. But we are going to do a webinar on that with that analyst firm. We licensed a webinar because the paper was so great. We'll initially gate registrations for the first time. But eventually we'll release the replay ungated, because we want people to see that information. So it's really about just getting people interested, fascinate them enough to where they want to have a conversation with you.
Well, get them curious, and they'll click on the link. They'll tumble in the rabbit hole, and will keep falling, as long as the content they provide is interesting and valuable and is actionable.
Exactly. And also give them an opportunity to choose their own adventure. This is something we aren't doing yet, but some companies, obviously the PLG approach is really the best model these days, the buying cycle. Buyers want to control their own destiny. They want to play. They don't want to talk to us creepy sales and marketing people, and we're the ones standing in the way of them getting their hands on the trial of the product or what have you. But if you give them a mechanism to try it out on their own without talking to you, without collecting their info and, sicking a salesperson after them, they're more likely to come to you. It's a much softer approach than we've ever used before, but I think that's what works.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned PLG, but it seems like every few years there is a new concept that captures everyone's attention. It was inbound for a while, pioneered by HubSpot, that everyone
Right.
that was so fascinated by it that everyone has jumped on this bandwagon. Everything was about inbound and content, and but at some point people realized that all the traffic, all this inbound traffic, only 1-2% converts. So it's not something you can rely as a 100% tool. Then it was large scale events like Black Hat, RSA, Gartner. Then with COVID, everyone was doing virtual webinars and virtual events. I think it's still obviously it's still a thing, but I think it kind of took off around that time. It's PLG now, and I think the future is going to be AI and ChatGPT. So there's always some tool, but I think in the end of the day, it's a tool in a toolbox with many tools. And with this in mind, like what is working for you now? What's effective for you?
Really, one of the things that I'm building right now because I'm seeing that it's helping our sales team the most, is really looking at account level engagement and really building out that ABX approach. So for us, it's less about, I like the point that you just made it, and I want to back up to that in a second, and then I'll come back to my answer. There's tools in the toolbox, right? Now, some companies aren't ready for PLG yet, or they don't have PLG yet, or whatever. That's different. But we talk about like the old model of lead scoring. It's not as effective as it used to be. Inbound, not as effective in conversion as it used to be. That doesn't mean that you don't still do some of those things and move them around and reshape them based on what your focus might be, or what assets you might have at that time. So what I was finding is, we have a very small sales team. We don't have an SDR at this point. We will need one to truly do ABX when we get that fully built out, because they're a core component of such. Small sales team going after large enterprise. There are a lot of potential personas in there, and 1 to thousands doesn't really scale. But if we start taking an account intelligence approach, where I can feed to the sales team, all right, here's a score on an account. Again, it doesn't mean they're ready to buy, but we've got this average number of page views, this average number of clicks through emails, this average number of people that are engaged in our social on this account, this average of intent in these areas over these last several days, et cetera, et cetera. That gives you a good indicator that they're spending some time on our site. They may be looking at competitors. They're reading information that might be relevant to us, because we're feeding in lots of tools to get that data. And I'm building out all that to be visible in the account object in Salesforce. And then they're like, all right, I'm not going to spend my time with maybe one lead. Yeah, I really want this key account over here, but maybe only have one active lead that sometimes opens an email. And we know the whole issue with opens in two. At an account level, I think it's different versus, oh, there's this account, and maybe a little bit smaller than this, like one that I see is like the alpha and omega of all accounts on my list. But I've got 12 active people from that, and we've got a cumulative amount of 50 click-throughs on emails, and I've got 3 people from the company that have liked something on social media, all showing up on their account view in Salesforce. They have their outbound strategy.
It's interesting. So it's almost ranking accounts based on engagement helps you focus attention of your sales team and your marketing efforts. So that not all accounts are created equal, even though they may or may not be ready to buy, but engagement makes them a more likely candidate of someone who is mid-stage in the customer journey, rather than so early on. It's going to be a super lengthy process to walk them through to the end of it.
Or if they're spending that much time engaging, that means they might have more time to have a conversation as well. So it does take some retraining. And I don't say this with any negative assessment against my sales brethren at all, but I think they're very used to, like, you know, whether it's an SDR or marketing team, or maybe a junior AE if they're a larger enterprise rep or what have you, bringing over to them, or even the channel, bringing someone that's like, okay, this person has shown high intent. They requested a demo. Those are harder to get these days too. They requested a demo, or they've gone to their channel rep and they said that they want to try us. You know, that is great. We want as many of those as possible. Everybody does, but they're fewer and further between, especially in a down market, and especially the way the buyer cycle or the buyer approach has changed. If we remodel, reframe the way that they look at scoring of leads and accounts as engagement indicators, they can think about things more strategically. And it's not like they're not blindly chasing, but they're also going at it with the right cadence, where they're not just lobbing something over saying, hey, I heard you're interested in blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, they've really got to work that. And I think one thing that I'm noticing, that I think we're bridging out of marketing a little bit, but it is related. I think sales folks, until the last year or so, didn't really have to be content experts themselves as much. They had to qualify, they had to know the different qualification approaches, MEDPIC, MEDIC, BANT, whatever you use. And they had to be able to pitch and have the conversation with the prospects. But they've got to be able to almost do their demand gen quality level of outbound on their own in order to get engagement with accounts, because it's really the human touch that gets folks more than the mass marketing nurture. But you need that same quality of content, where you don't really, I never used to see that with sales, because again, they would mostly get stuff that was largely warmed up.
It's I guess it's just a question of incentives, right? So they're incentivized to close deals and get commission, right? So, but to your point, you can approach everyone with, hey, I heard you're interested, because that's not necessarily true. If they're engaging, maybe there's something else going on. And if you're asking an open-ended question, so just help me understand what's going on in your organization, what challenges you're facing, what's going on, and just be quiet and listen. I think at least you'll find out why is that they're clicking on this why they're consuming the content, why they click on the email. And it could be all sorts of reasons, but before finding out what the reason is, you can't really progress to the next step in the journey.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think for that matter, solution marketing and solution selling are more important than ever. You can't go after the prospect anymore and say, do you want to XYZ? Maybe if you're CrowdStrike, you know, maybe if you're SentinelOne, or, you know, someone that's known for something, but you can't go after them and do that. You have to go after and really find out what their problem is and talk to them about potential solutions. And then it just so happens we have this, right?
Exactly. Well, I think it's especially interesting when you're creating a new category. So you're creating kind of a new space, a new box that's not really occupied. It does take a lot of evangelism and education. Jen, I know we're coming up on time. I just want to, I guess, one of the last questions, when we're switching gears here a little bit. It was a very interesting conversation, by the way. Imagine you have a crystal ball and you can see into the future. What do you think cybersecurity marketers and marketing executives will think about, be excited about, or worried, I don't know, 6 months from now, 12 months from now, some of the themes or maybe technologies or ways of thinking that you think will evolve and be and kind of get to big time in 12 months time?
So I think I'll kind of go with a blanket approach for the sake of time. This ties into something I said before. It's kind of a prediction, but it's also, I think, a requirement that every single marketer has to be operational. And by operational is you have to have some fundamental understanding of how your marketing automation and how your CRM works and how your sales team works, and be able to analyze that data and use that data to fine tune your output regardless of what your function is. And I think then you can apply it to whatever tool in the toolbox we've talked about on this call to get more targeted and bring in your prospect. You know, one of the, you know, I do think that getting away, when you're transitioning into ABX, it's hard to get away from the one-to-one, the lead generation, old school demand generation. I think eventually it's all going to be ABX, and people have to re-embrace the new mode of SDR, which I like to call demand creation versus sales development, but it's the human element there. I think that's the way that companies need to move, and that again ties to the operations. And the other thing I'll say is, I'm actually talking about this at a conference at the end of the year, is that, you know, I think a lot of marketing folks, we stop ourselves from a career development scenario at CMO, but that doesn't have to be it. A good marketer, we are, you don't look at the funnel anymore, right? You look at that bow tie approach where you're engaged with customers, you're engaged with partners, you're engaged across the board. And that gives you the wherewithal to where you can move on to like a COO or a VC or a CEO type role. Maybe I don't want to be a CRO. I don't want to carry a bag. I don't have that kind of wherewithal, but I think that's something that's going to be really interesting. I think you're going to see more CMOs or more marketers go into breakout roles and bypass the CMO.
Interesting.
Altogether.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's certainly a trend that well, the CEO and VC, I think both are very kind of viable routes. Jen, thank you so much. This was very interesting and thank you for providing sharing your insights. Where can people find you? What's the best way to connect?
So I am on Twitter, X, as Media Fighter, Media PHYTER, or just Jennifer Leggio on LinkedIn. Reach out to me. I'd be happy to chat.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.